we have to lock down because the persons who are going to the corner shop.
Locking down the country for black people, but opening it up for white people, is nothing short of racism and treason. This administration has displayed a constant pattern of behavior, which consists of giving foreigners privileges and exceptions to the pandemic protocols while ruthlessly locking down on Jamaicans. These tourists are suspected to have brought the initial cases of COVID-19 into Jamaica. Then these same tourists are again suspected of introducing both the Delta and Mu variants of the virus to Jamaica. Additionally, while the Prime Minister pursued a stern campaign to get Jamaicans vaccinated, he was recently broadcasted by the media, saying that he will not require tourists to vaccinate. However, I naturally anticipate a change in such an approach after harsh backlash from the people. So, while the government has affected many small businesses and many hustlers with its year-long on and off lockdowns, the same government is breaking COVID protocols for tourists and using financial necessity as a justification. So, don't the poorer class of citizens have financial needs that are also affected by the lockdowns? If the government can admit that it is broke because of the pandemic lockdowns, then what financial state do they expect poor people to be in? Many people say that the Prime Minister doesn't care about the poor and is using the lockdown to pressure poor people into submitting to the vaccine campaign. Now, I can honestly see why many people hold such opinions. I mean, aren't we all sacrificing to fight the pandemic? So why can't the government, who want to vaccinate us all, sacrifice to keep the country safe from another wave? And if the government keeps reintroducing tourism during the lockdown, then when will the pandemic and the lockdowns ever end?
One eternity later.
It's obvious that our open borders led to the Delta and Mu variants being introduced to the country, so it is clear that the weak point in the management of the pandemic is actually overseas travel, and not necessarily poor people, who seem to be getting all of the blame, seemingly because of their reluctance to take the same vaccines that tourists, meaning white people, were recently exempted from. Now cruise ships are being docked, and particular businesses are being chosen to be open on lockdown days for white people, in a country where our ancestors were enslaved by white people. These politicians always seem to put the interest of foreigners over the interest of Jamaicans, and this can be seen by how they sold critical infrastructure, like our wharves, energy company, and airport, to foreigners. Also, most of the businesses in Jamaica are owned and operated by foreigners who wouldn't even allow black people in their country. If that isn't treason against the people of Jamaica, then I don't know what is. Who remember that cruise ships played a major role in spreading COVID-19 globally in 2020. Now, cruise ships are allowed to operate in the middle of the pandemic because white people want to party. What about us in Jamaica, who haven't attended a party in almost 2 years because we are abiding by regulations? Now you understand why the Queen of England is still Jamaica's head of state after almost 60 years of false independence celebrations. The racial attitudes of the government of Jamaica hasn't changed since the colonial days, when the racist British governed in a way that always disadvantaged black people. Allowing white people to violate protocols while having black people on lockdown is racism from our very own Jamaican government, and we should all unite in condemning it. No PNP or JLP division, because the PNP would do the same, and while we are defending politicians, they are busy sharing up that tourism money among themselves, regardless of party lines. Black people, please don't become a fool for politics. Wake up and see that it's all about divide and rule, and that none of the party politicians care about anything but money. Crime is mass murdering Jamaicans, and I've yet to see an effort that is half of what is dedicated to vaccination being dedicated to fighting crime. Since the government cares so much about saving us from COVID, then what about the people dying from crime and the hunger being suffered by the poor during the lockdown? What about a new approach to crime and a care package for the poor and starving? The only concern is about vaccinating Jamaicans with vaccines imported from racist countries that hate black people, but we shouldn't ever wonder whether these vaccines are safe, as if the infamous Tuskegee syphilis experiment never happened. Google the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and see that vaccines have been used by the United States government to harm black people. Marcus Garvey once said that any leadership that teaches you to depend on another race is a leadership that will enslave you. Let me repeat that so that the 90% black population of Jamaica can understand what is happening here. Any leadership that teaches you to depend on another race is a leadership that will enslave you. Here are a few instances where the government violated COVID protocols and potentially contributed to a rise in local COVID infections. 1. Aloe Rica. 2. The 2020 general election. 3. Shahini Robinson's funeral. 4. Sigma Run. 5. Kamina Johnson's father's memorial. 6. Mocha Fest. 7. Dream Weekend. If we don't unite beyond PNP and JLP and condemn this, it will likely continue. Remember, we didn't even stop talking about Mocha Fest before Dream Weekend happened, and before we could forget about Dream Weekend, this cruise ship racism is going on. It's time for black people to wake up to this racist double standard. The government and opposition have disappointed the people of Jamaica yet again. We need a revolution in Jamaica, but how much people will stand up for the upliftment of black people and not betray the revolution for money? That had to be said, because betrayal from within is black people's biggest weakness since the starting of the slave trade. One love. Stay strong and be safe during the pandemic and the never-ending crime. This was a production by the team behind Terreno Beckford's campaign for head of state. Please check out his page and support the removal of the Queen and the Governor General from Jamaica's political life.